Nayatra Shasta Bhavishyati Kale Bhagavan Yughante Yaya Lesha Vapi Satam Nahahe Katahashu Pashandhino Dvijajana Vishala Nirdevaha Svaha Svada Vasariti Smagiro Nayatra Shasta Bhavishyati Kale Bhagavan Yughante Purpose. Yaya Lesha Apisat Hare Katashu Ashandino Dvijajana Vishalanu Devaha Rahasya Saditi Smagiro Nayatra Asta Bhavishyati Kale Bhagavan Yughante He Sheshahiladam Nahahe Katashu Pashandino Dvijajana Vishalanu Deva Svaha Svadhava Sariti Smagiro Nayatna Shasta Bhavishyati Kale Bhagavan Yughante. Yarihi, when it happens, Allah Yeshu, in the residence of, Api, even, Satam, civilized gentlemen, Na, not, Harehe, of this personality of Godhead, Kataha, topics, Suyuhu, who take place, Pashandina, atheists, Dvijajana, persons declaring themselves to be the higher three classes, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. Vishashalaha, the lower class Shudras. Nirdevaha, ministers of the government. Svaha, hymns to perform sacrifices. Svada, the ingredients to perform sacrifices. Vasat, the altar of sacrifice. Iti, all these. Sma, shall. Giraha, words. Na, never. Yatra, anywhere. Shasta, the chastiser. Bhavishyati, will appear. Kalehe, of the Kali age. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Yuga Ante, at the end of. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Thereafter, at the end of Kali Yuga, when there exists no topics on the subject of God, even at the residence of so-called saints and respectable gentlemen of the three higher castes, and when the power of government is transferred to the hand of ministers elected from the low-born Sudra caste, or those less than them, and when nothing is known of the techniques of sacrifice, even by word, at that time the Lord will appear as a supreme chastiser. Purport. The symptoms of the worst conditions of the material world at the last stage of this age, called Kali Yuga, are stated herein. The sum and substance of such conditions is godlessness. Even the so-called saints and higher castes of the social orders, generally known as the Dvijajanas, or the twice-born, will become atheists. As such, all of them will practically forget even the holy name of the Lord, and what to speak of his activities. The higher caste of society, namely the intelligent class of men guiding the destinies of the social orders, the administrative class of men guiding the law and order of society, and the productive class of men guiding the economic development of the society, must all be properly well-versed in knowledge of the Supreme Lord, knowing factually his name, quality, pastimes, interest, paraphernalia, and personalities. The saints and the higher castes or orders of society are judged by their proportion of knowledge in the science of God, or tattvajana, and not by any kind of birthright or bodily designations. Such designations, without any knowledge of the science of God and practical knowledge on devotional service, are considered to be all decorations of dead bodies. And when there is too much inflation of these decorated dead bodies in society, there develop so many anomalies in the progressive peaceful life per section of the social orders. They are no more to be designated as the Dvijajanas or the twice-borns. The significance of being twice-born has been explained in many places in these great literatures, and once again is reminded herein as birth, executed by sex life of the father and the mother. It's called animal birth. But such animal birth and progress of life on the animal principles of eating, sleeping, fearing and mating, without any scientific culture or spiritual life, is called the Sudra life, or to be more explicit, the uncultured life of the lower class of men. It is stated herein that the governmental power of society in the Kali Yuga will be passed over to the uncultured, godless labor castes of men. And thus the Nirdevahas, or the ministers of government, will be the Vishalas, or the uncultured lower caste men of society. No one can expect any peace and prosperity in a human society full of uncultured lower classes of men. The symptoms of such uncultured social animals are already in vogue, and it is the duty of the leaders of men to take note of it and try to reform the social order by introducing the principles of twice-born men trained in the science of God consciousness. This can be done by expanding the culture of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world. In the degraded conditions of human society, the Lord incarnates as a Kalki avatar and kills all the demonic without mercy. Om Jnana Timidhandasya Jnana Jana Shalakaya Chakshun Milatam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamsya Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vidam Dam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Bharjana Sahedam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vidamsya He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpatet Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Dapta Kanchana Goyangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Nishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriya Vanchakalpatahrubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Mevacha Patitana Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadaya Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Hayama, 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 Haye, Haye. Hare Krishna. Thank you for attending today's morning Srimad class. Today, in today's particular verse, we are discussing the negative effects of Kali Yuga. And this particular verse explains three things. Firstly, it explains the effects of Kali Yuga. Then it explains how these effects actually operate. And finally, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains the solution to all these effects. So just on first sight, the first observation we can make from this verse is that Srimad Bhagavatam teaches us how to respond to problems. So Kali Yuga, obviously, we can see is a big issue. The qualities that have been described herein about Kali Yuga, this is just one verse, but in the 12th canto, there's like a whole section of chapters just dedicated to the qualities of Kali Yuga. They're very bad. But instead of pondering over these problems, the first thing that Srimad Bhagavatam does is first explain the problems, then it elaborates further on how these effects operate, and then finally the solution to these problems is given. So in the beginning, the first problem of Kali Yuga that is described in this verse is there are no topics that exist on the subject of God, even in the residence of so-called saints. So from this main point, there are two things we can get. Firstly, there are no topics on Krishna consciousness, no topics on God, and then these topics are not even known even to saints. So right now, we are very fortunate that in ISKCON, because of Srila Prabhupada's mercy, we have access to Krishna Katha. But it's very easy for us to take advantage of, but at the same time we also overlook the fortune that we have. Krishna Katha should not be taken for granted necessarily, because hearing Krishna Katha is very important in our advancement in this material world. We have no hope in progressing further if it's not for hearing Krishna Katha. So one very important point in this regard that Srila Prabhupada made in a lecture in Los Angeles in April 1973, he was explaining that everything starts from hearing. So this verse that he was commenting on was Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, Smaranam Bhada Sevanam, Archanam Vananam Dasyam, Sakyam Atmanivedanam. So Srila Prabhupada was explaining that as soon as you become expert in hearing and chanting, then the next stage is Smaranam. Smaranam means thinking of. Anything you speak or hear, later you contemplate, you meditate, Smaranam. So Smaranam is the third stage. First of all, one must begin with hearing, Shravanam. Otherwise, what about meditation? Therefore, we must first all hear about the subject matter of meditation. So in this particular point, Srila Prabhupada is explaining that we do have many processes of bhakti, but everything starts with hearing. And he was explaining that people meditate. We go to India, there are so many different types of people meditate. But you can't meditate if you can't remember something if you don't hear it first. Hearing is like the first process before you actually go further. So in this particular regard, we can understand that to progress further in this line of Navada Bhakti, to progress further, hearing is an essential. It's very important at this stage, because if we don't cover the basics, then we can't go further. Just like in school, for example, we have kindergarten, then grade 1, grade 2, all the way up to grade 12, then we have university. Even now, you can't go ahead of a grade unless you actually finish kindergarten or finish the grades before first. The foundation has to be set. So as a Krishna consciousness, our foundation is hearing. So I have to go into this a little bit fast today because time is running short. But the second effect of Kali Yuga that is mentioned is that the power of government is transferred to the hands of ministers elected from the low-born Sudra class or those less than them. So I have to be very careful with what I say here because I can't call the politicians Sudras. But what we can do when we look into this verse, we can see that Kali Yuga can be reflected even through the government. An example of this is the Mahabharata. We've probably all have read or heard of Mahabharata. And in Mahabharata, it explains that Duryodhana was actually the incarnation of Kali Yuga. And this was at the end of Dwapara Yuga. So we can understand that like royalty, even through government, Kali Yuga can be manifested. We can see Kali Yuga reflected through the government. Before the end of Dwapara Yuga, before Hastinapur was, before Duryodhana was, existing on this earth, There was no question of unloyal practices, or there was no question of Kali Yuga at all. But however, when Duryodhana entered, that was when we started seeing slowly, step by step, after Parikshit Maharaj left, then step by step we started seeing that society, the politicians, the government started becoming more and more degraded. So in this regard, Sudra, the word that Srila Prabhupada uses, Sudra, sometimes we have to understand what is a Sudra. Sometimes we think, when I personally think of Sudra, the first thing that I think of is a low-class person. But Srila Prabhupada actually gives two definitions of what a Sudra actually is. He firstly says that Sudra is the lower class of civilized human society, but he also says that Sudras are less intelligent. They're less intelligent because they have no access to the Vedas. They're frankly less intelligent. So this we can understand that the Sudras, they are less intelligent, not because of their class in human society, because they are low, but because they're not intelligent. So we have to understand that to be intelligent, one has to refer to Krishna first. In Srimad Bhagavatam 3.15.48, Shukadeva Goswami does say that persons who are very expert and most intelligent in things, as they are, engage in hearing narrations of the auspicious activities and pastimes of the Lord, which are worth chanting and hearing. So the first section of this verse, Shukadeva Goswami says that people who are expert and intelligent, what do they do in understanding things? What they do is that they engage in hearing narrations of the auspicious activities of the Lord. So this, we can understand that to become intelligent, first thing that one person has to do is they have to hear the narrations of Krishna. Otherwise, we can't be classified as intelligent. Like we can see, Srila Prabhupada has given examples of the politicians. He's given examples of those who are in charge of economic development, and also lawyers as well. Real intelligence is when they put Krishna in the center, when they meditate on Krishna's activities. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that those who are in the administrative class of men in economic development or law, they have to focus on Krishna's pastimes. So when I first read this verse, I did listen to a few classes by Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada was giving quite a few classes on economic development. Now, economic development, as I'm sure we all know, it's a very intense topic. There are so many different categories. But one thing that I realized is that the world's problems can be solved just by putting Krishna in the center. Now, this may sound like a very bold statement in the beginning, but I'm sure maybe some of you, maybe any of you might have done economics in high school or university or something. But in economics, we see that there are many fields. There's macroeconomic policy, microeconomic policy, then there's monetary and fiscal, then there's contraction and expansionary stance. It's very long. But when we actually go into the first page of our economic textbook, the whole field of economics is meant to solve just one problem. This problem we call the economic problem. And the economic problem is, how do we meet consumers' unlimited demands with the limited resources that we have? So the economic problem is basically explaining that it's centered around meeting consumers' unlimited expectations, unlimited demands with the limited resources that we have. And we can see that in our world today, there are a lot of problems that are associated with producing. Like some people are overproducing, some people are harming the environment. Global warming, there's so many different things that are happening as a result of them trying to solve this problem. But when we actually look in what Srila Prabhupada has actually taught us, that if we live a Krishna conscious lifestyle, this can actually be solved. In Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada has taught us simple living, higher thinking. We don't enjoy sense gratification necessarily. We live simply, but our higher aim, our higher standard of thinking is to please Krishna. So we can see if people actually start cutting down on sense gratification, then there is no economic problem. Recently I was having my economic exam, my preliminary exam, and I was just thinking that if people did follow Krishna consciousness, then half the economic textbook would be gone, because the economics is mainly trying to solve the economic problem of consumers' unlimited demands with limited resources. Basically, sense gratification. How do we control our sense of gratification? How do we control our material desires? Secondly, the second example Srila Prabhupada gave was law. So law, we can see that in our current society, we have so many different legal systems, we have so many different acts, so many different types of laws. And the main purpose of all these laws is to be guidelines for human society, and to punish people if the guidelines are not followed. So it's basically to stop crime and immoral lifestyle habits. So basically it's trying to stop crime and to punish those who commit crime. But we can see that right now in law, in the legal field, there's a big issue going on, because the law has been established for many centuries now, and people are still committing crimes. Crimes are still going on. And the laws are not working the way they should be. So now all the lawyers, the government itself, they're now stressing over, like, how do we reform these acts? But what we do need to focus on is that in Krishna consciousness especially, if we go back into our Puranas, go into Srimad Bhagavatam, into the history that we have, we can see that, for example, we can see Srimad Bhagavatam 1.12.34. There, Shukadeva Goswami says the story of Yudhishthira Maharaj. So we know that Yudhishthira Maharaj, after the whole Mahabharata war was over, he went and he was obviously, in great distress, great remorse. And because of that, what he did, he decided to perform 3 sacrifices. And to perform 3 sacrifices, it's you need a lot of wealth to do those sacrifices. So what he did is that he collected wealth, and verse number 34 explains that he collected the wealth that previously King Marut actually donated to the Brahmanas. So Srila Prabhupada explains that there was a time where there was a great king, King Marut, and what he did, he donated all of his wealth to the Brahmanas. And the Brahmanas, they only took what they needed. And many generations actually passed, but what actually happened is that the citizens didn't touch that wealth at all, because it wasn't their property. The wealth was sitting there for many, many generations, but no one even, people were just living simply. No one actually went and stole the wealth. So we can see, Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport that the people at that time, to even take another person's property, it was considered such a big thing, big sin. What to speak of crime? Like, no one would commit crime at all. Like in Ayodhya, for example, we look at when Lord Ram was ruling Ayodhya. We could see that there was no question of crime at all. Like people would go to sleep at night, they'll go to bed, they'll go to bed, but they'll leave their doors open. If we can see that, like even now, if we look at like our current, material world, our doors, we have 2 doors in the opening, we have 2 locks for each of those doors, then we have an alarm system, then we have security cameras. Back when Lord Ram was ruling, there was no such thing as alarm systems, or no such thing as double locks and double doors. Main thing is that there was no cheating whatsoever, there was no question of crime. The reason is because in Ayodhya, everyone's main life was centered around pleasing Lord Ram. So for us, we can understand that if we center our lives on pleasing Krishna and simply on Krishna consciousness, so many issues can actually be solved. Like our main aim is not to solve economic development. Our main aim is not to stop crime. Our main aim is to serve Krishna, to please Krishna. But when we actually please Krishna, we can actually see that we don't start living our lives immorally. We start doing things the way we should be doing, which solves the issue that the government is currently having right now. The third effect of Kali Yuga is that nothing is known of the techniques of sacrifice. So in Kali Yuga specifically, there are so many sacrifices we cannot perform, like the Ashwamedha Yagna or animal sacrifices. We're not qualified to do those sacrifices. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11.5.13, Srila Prabhupada explains why this is actually forbidden in Kali Yuga. So he says that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, however, has forbidden such animal sacrifice in this age because there are no qualified brahmanas to chant the mantras, and the so-called sacrificial arena becomes an ordinary butcher shop. So we can see that even in India right now, there's a custom of people doing animal sacrifices, killing animals. But Srila Prabhupada explains that this is not a sacrificial arena, it's just an ordinary butcher shop, because they're just slaughtering animals. in the purport of 4.13.25, there it is explained, the process of fire sacrifices are explained. And when we actually read the descriptions of the fire sacrifices, we can see that what we're doing right now is technically nothing. In the purport it says that a Vedic sacrifice is not an ordinary performance. In the sacrifices, the demigods used to participate in such sacrifices, and the animals sacrificed in such performances were reincarnated as in a new life. So now, like many millennia ago, back in previous yugas, people were able to perform fire sacrifices. They were able to slaughter animals because those animals would be given a new life after the yagna. So then in the verse, Srila Prabhupada explains that in this age of Kali, there are no powerful brahmanas who can invite the demigods or give renewed life to animals. In this age, therefore, the only practical yagna is Sankirtan yagna, a chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra 24 hours a day. So we can see that even in Srimad Bhagavatam, if we go towards the beginning, how Srimad Bhagavatam actually started, we can see that the sages at Naimisharanya, what they did is that first thing they did before Srimad Bhagavatam came, before the chance of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam came, they sat down at the fire sacrifice. And normally before Kali Yuga actually started, what they'll do is that they'll just chant the mantras and the fire will start lighting up. But what they realized is that when they sat down for the fire sacrifice, they chanted the mantras, but the fire wasn't lighting up. Nowadays, like if we go in our fire sacrifices, people use a matchstick or use some lighter or something to light the fires. But back in the previous yugas, that wasn't the case. People would chant mantras and the fire would start coming. But then the sages actually realized that Kali Yuga has started happening because people weren't able to chant mantras that would make the fire arise. So in this particular age, the only sacrifice we can do is Sankirtan Yagna. And Srila Prabhupada, we all know that Srila Prabhupada put heavy emphasis on Sankirtan, on chanting constantly. And there's one letter that he wrote in 1974 to Bhadri Narayana, and he was saying that actually, I'll give this a bit of context. What happened is that Bhadri Narayan, what he did, he had a Sankirtan party, and he started, going out and distributing books and doing Harinam Sankirtan. And Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter afterwards, and he was in Bombay at that time, but he wrote, "I am always happy to hear of the wonderful activities of spreading Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtana movement. Your activities are very pleasing." And then he says, "Going door to door, person to preach the message of chanting Hare Krishna is actually the Yuga Dharma of this age." So this, when I say, I'm sure people may be thinking, oh, I am saying it, or my parents are saying it. I'm not saying this, my parents are not saying this. Srila Prabhupada is saying that the Yuga Dharma of this age is to go and preach the message of Krishna consciousness, preach the message of chanting and distributing the books, going door to door. So we can see that yesterday, actually, Guru Maharaj is giving a class on Zoom, and he was explaining that there are two types of chanting. One is Kirtan, one is Sankirtan. So Kirtan, we know, is when one person does it by himself. So what we do in japa, what we do when we chant to ourselves, that is Kirtan. But Sankirtan is when we share the holy name with other people, when we chant together. So we can see that Sankirtan is actually more prominent, more important than Kirtan itself. Like we can see that in Srimad Bhagavatam, for example, 12th canto, Nama Sankirtanam Yasya Sarvapapa Pranashanam. It says Nama Sankirtanam Yasya. We all know Golokera Premadana Harinama Sankirtana. Sankirtan is like the main essence of the current Yuga Dharma that we have. Sharing is one thing, sharing the holy name is one thing, but chanting to ourselves is another. And Srila Prabhupada placed heavy emphasis on Sankirtana, because Sankirtana is involving everyone and getting everyone to chant. But in Yuga Dharma, Srila Prabhupada actually placed heavy emphasis on the Sankirtana aspect, sharing the holy name with other people. There was a letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote back in the 1950s when he was establishing the League of Devotees. There were a few people who expressed an interest to join his movement, and he wrote to them a long letter saying that the movement that we have right now, this is before ISKCON was incorporated, but he said that the movement that we have right now is not an eating and sleeping movement. He said it very strongly. This movement is not an eating and sleeping movement, it is a preaching movement. So for us, our Yuga Dharma is Sankirtan, we have to share with other people. Srila Prabhupada wrote that this movement is not meant necessarily for eating or sleeping. So preaching, it's very easy to do, but that's actually what we are meant to be doing. The temple, normally we see that, I'm not trying to point fingers at anyone, but people take advantage of ISKCON as it is. People go, they talk, they gossip, they eat, have prasadam, and they go back to sleep. But that's not how Krishna consciousness should be. Our main aim should be preaching. An example of this was maybe 2 years ago. I was fortunate enough to go to Soho Street Temple in London during the book distribution marathon time. And there, the temple maybe the same size as the temple right now. We went to the temple, and there, all over the place, all over the walls, all over the Vyasasan, they had decorations on the book marathon, because the book marathon was going at that time. And on top of Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasan, they had a huge sign at the top, and it said how many devotees were participating in the book distribution marathon. And there, I think the number was 254 devotees. And we went into the temple, and I actually saw it for myself. There was only 4 devotees in the whole temple, and the temple was packed. The temple was the same size as Radha Gopinath is right now. Those who have been to London will know, maybe a little bit smaller, but the temple was packed. And there were 254 devotees doing book distribution. And we saw for ourselves that people were, the devotees, they were going for Harinam 6 hours a day. In the temple, we didn't see many brahmacharis at the temple. We didn't see many devotees. We went to the temple, and it was the same case every single day. It was just packed with so many non-devotees there for the first time. But there was only a handful of devotees. One person there to play Kurdas, one person to play Mridanga, and one person there to serve prasadam. Apart from that, there was no other devotees there. So we can actually see that the temple is not something that we should take advantage of. It's our base to go preaching. So by doing the Yuga Dharma, we're actually able to transform people. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada actually says that the symptoms of such uncultured social animals, Srila Prabhupada actually calls the people right now social animals, which is very strong, but he says are already in vogue. And it is the duty of the leaders of men to take note of it and try to perform the social order by introducing the principles of twice-born men trained in the science of God consciousness. This can be done by expanding the culture of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world. So to expand the culture of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world, which is what the brahmacharis are doing quite rigorously right now, to expand the Yuga Dharma all over the world, to make this possible, we have to preach. There's an example of His Grace Raya Rama Prabhu. Raya Rama Prabhu, maybe we might know. Formerly, he was actually the editor for the Back to Godhead magazine, and he actually had 3 services. He was the editor for the Back to Godhead magazine, he was in charge of deity worship, and plus he was also involved in Harinama as well. And what actually happened is that one day, time is running out, 2 minutes. Anyway, so what happened is that he stopped going for Harinam. He stopped going on Harinam and he started focusing on his editing work. And Srila Prabhupada actually found out that he stopped going on Harinam. So what he did, he wrote a letter to Raya Rama Prabhu on 17th of May, 1969. And he said that because the devotees, they started complaining to Srila Prabhupada that Raya Rama Prabhu was not going on Harinam. So he said that my advice to you is that under the circumstances, is that at least for 1 hour, you must all go to have Sankirtan outside of the streets or in the park. Then he said, that is your life and soul, first business. Our main life and soul, our first business is to go out and preach on Harinam. Then he says, your next business is completing and chanting 16 rounds every day. And then the next business is your editing, and if you find extra time, then you can attend the temple ceremonies. Otherwise, you can stop these activities, but outdoor kirtana, your editing work, and chanting 16 rounds must be done. Then Srila Prabhupada says that outdoor kirtana must be done even at the cost of suspending all of your editorial work. Now this was said in 1969. That was when the production of books and the BBT and the Back to God magazine, they were going on in full swing. But here Srila Prabhupada is saying that outdoor kirtana must be done even at the cost of suspending all of your editing work. Then he said that it's your first and foremost business. In Krishna consciousness, our first and foremost business is to go out and preach. And he says that temple worship is not so important. He says that if need be, the whole temple can be locked, but outdoor kirtana cannot be stopped. So this is one of my favorite quotes actually, that the temple, we have the temple. I'm not saying we lock the temple right now, we go out on Harinam. That's not the case. But we should not ignore outdoor kirtan at the same time. Harinam is very, very important. Otherwise, how are we going to outreach to the public in general? We can only reach out to the public in general if we do Harinam or go out on book distribution. And I think this will be my final point before I conclude. But His Holiness Indradumana Maharaj, he was giving a lecture in Bombay during Nityananda Tirthodashi, and he was saying that our deity is Harinam Prabhu, and our temple is the street. So we know His Holiness Indradumana Maharaj is very fired up on Harinam Sankirtan. But he said that our temple is the street, and our deity is Harinam Prabhu. So our main duty is to go out on the go on the street and do Harinam Sankirtan. And finally, Guru Maharaj, he was giving a class recently, and he was saying that during the book distribution marathon, everyone went out on book distribution.
Qualities of Krishna, always chanting the glories of Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram.